thank you all for coming. My name is Eric Elgin. I'm the Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program Manager, and I'm here with a team of us, and I'll let each of them do a quick introduction. Joe, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Joe Lattimore here. I met or worked with many of you over the years. I'm the MiCorps program director and heavily involved with both the Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program and the Volunteer Stream Monitoring Program.
And Tamara?
Hi, everyone. I'm Tamara Lipsey. I work with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, also known as EGLE, and the MiCorps programs, both the Cooperative Lake Monitoring Program and the Stream Monitoring Programs are funded by the state of Michigan. So I am the program manager with EGLE.
Thank you. And Jean? Oh, still on mute there, Jean.
I always forget to unmute myself. I'm Jean Roth, and I provide you with supplies, and I'll soon be sending out the phosphorus bottles in case you're worried about it. And if you need something, I'm here for you.
She definitely is. All right, so the purpose of today's presentation is just for us to give some key reminders and some tips for our sampling season, kind of midway through, and then also to open it up for questions from all of you. So let's get started. I just wanted to express, I love the summer sampling time. How great is it to get out onto our lakes when it's so lovely out and then get to learn a lot more about them. For some of my studies I've done in the past, I was on 6 lakes every 3 days collecting tons of data. And it's amazing what you can see. You don't think it can change, in 3 days, but there can be dramatic changes throughout the season, and so it's great, being out on the water and seeing and trying to understand what's going on. And look, we're all smiling. Everyone's always smiling when you're on the boat collecting data. You've met a few of us, but I just wanted to say MiCorps, the CLMP program, is a great partnership, a great collaboration between a bunch of organizations as well as individuals. And so you see many of us here, but there's also Paul Steen, Melissa DeSimone, and Mike Gallagher. All of us try to make this program work across the state every year. And if you have any questions, please go to the MiCorps webpage and you'll find all of our contacts there, and ask away. So let's get into those summer tips and reminders. And before I do, this is just a transition slide, but I have to ask, does anyone know what plant is in my hand? Feel free to say it out loud.
Starry stonewort.
Starry stonewort. That's that. I didn't zoom in any further because I kind of wanted to show the scale, and you can see that sometimes these bulbils, is what this is called, can be quite small. Here's this fishing line kind of filament look here. That's the root-like structure on starry stonewort, and there's that bulbil that looks like a star. And my dirty fingernails. So our first reminder and tip is about assisting volunteers. So many of you have other folks that are helping you on your lake or on your lake or lakes. And when you enrolled, you can decide if you're a lead volunteer or an assisting volunteer. Well, we would love if there are folks helping you on the water, it would be great for them to create an account and then associate their account with your lake. And this allows us to keep track. It's nice to know how many volunteers there are in our program out in the state at any one summer. It's also important because part of that, as you all know, that sign up process requires a waiver. And so that's important. And we'd like everybody who is volunteering for our program to have signed that waiver. And then final and really important is that we would also like to recognize them. Some assisting volunteers are assisting for years, and we would love to recognize that and celebrate it. So It's the same process as all of you had to do for enrollment, but when you get down to that bottom part, you would click assisting volunteer there and not lead volunteer. This started last year, but as this is a great change where the Exotic Aquatic Plant Watch and Score the Shore the enrollment is all summer long. And so if you know of area lakes that you're talking to, or if you yourself on your lake haven't enrolled in these programs, but you are finding yourself wanting to, you can do that until August 31st. In the past, it used to be in the beginning of May, like all of our other parameters. So this opens up a great opportunity to get more lakes involved, but then also to do things on your own lakes. So talking about the Exotic Aquatic Plant Watch. So that is, just as a reminder, an early detection protocol for aquatic invasive plants. And there is a plant that is an emerging threat and is now in a few more area lakes. So European frogbit. Originally it has, or in the 90s and for much of its time here in Michigan, it was found mostly in the Great Lakes coastal wetlands of Lake Erie, Lake St. Clair, the Detroit River, up into Saginaw Bay, and other parts of Lake Huron, and then also up in the UP, but in the St. Mary's River area. Then in around 2016, we saw a lake in Grand Rapids, Reeds and Fisk Lakes, having a big population, established population of European frogbit. And since 2016, we've now seen it pop around the state in inland waters. Sometimes in Oakland County, it's heavily in, or where we're finding it is in ditches and water retention ponds. But then in other areas, we're finding them in lakes. And the newest one this year has been Muskegon Lake in Muskegon County. So that has now been a new confirmation here in 2022. So this is a high threat. We want to make sure that all of you know it. Even if you're not doing the Exotic Aquatic Plant Watch, it's important to have a sense of what this plant looks like, because we want to make sure to detect it before it becomes a major issue. And so just a little bit about that with identification is that it looks like a little water lily. As you can see in this picture, that's probably the biggest the leaf is going to get. This plant is free floating. And so as you can see, all the leaves are coming out of one location and the roots are hanging below. Since it's free floating, it's kind of like duckweed. It gets pushed off to the edges. It gets pushed into the emergent plants like cattails and reeds. And then that's where it goes. Now, if it's in really shallow water, its roots can dangle and root lightly in the sediment, but it's nothing like white water lily or yellow water lily. Has anyone ever tried to like pull up a leaf of white water lily or any of our water lilies? Is that they're really rooted in. So that's one key difference. There's our native water lilies are all rooted, where this one is free floating. So this is a look from a boat, not the best clear photo, but what you can see here is our native white water lilies. Even these little leaves right here are white water lily. But when we look closer to the edge of this narrowleaf cattail, all of these little leaves, this green that you see, that's European frogbit. So they're quite small. They can create a dense mat. And so if you're cruising around your lake, just keep an eye out in key spots where plants can kind of take hold. If you find oh, yep.
Yeah, can I ask a question on that? The lake that I'm at in Gogebic County, so we're right on the Wisconsin border. The map that you had was for Michigan, but is this also knocking on our door coming up through Wisconsin to enter the Western UP?
Yeah, you're right. I'm gonna have to renew how I speak about this. So last year was the first time it was detected in Wisconsin. So Michigan was the western boundary in North America, but now there is an invasion site in Green Bay in a coastal wetland. And so therefore that's a really good point, Greg. So thank you. There's now a new avenue of overland travel. We don't know, we're learning a lot about this plant right now and how it's moving and Is it moving by seeds? Is it moving by fragments? But I would say keep an eye out. Many Muskegon Lake, for example, Pentwater Lake, and the Lower Grand River, which are invaded, they all empty into Lake Michigan. And so they're likely avenues for them to move. So I'm looking at Shelby right now and Beaver Island, as a possibility of something drifting in. And I don't think I added this to a slide. I didn't. If you suspect you found European froglet, please don't hesitate to email a picture to Joe or I or anybody on our team. Alternatively, you can also contact Eagle. Joe, do you have, we'll put it in the chat.
Yep, I will.
Thank you. And there's multiple ways to send it to Eagle through the Missin app or to them directly with an email. But please don't hesitate if you think you do have it, let us know. Then Joe, I'll give it up to you.
All right. Yeah. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit because I want to talk a little bit about phosphorus and chlorophyll sampling. I was talking to a long-term volunteer the other day about how we handle those samples when they come in, and they were excited to learn about it, because I think for most folks, you take your samples, you drop them off at your designated location, and then that's all you know until you get your results later on. And so just a little insight on what happens to those samples. So you deliver them to your turn-in address as shown on the sampling schedule you can see here on the screen. And the staff at those drop-off locations will package them all up into coolers with ice packs to keep them nice and frozen. Then they get shipped overnight to Traverse City, which is where I'm based. And I will go through all of those samples, often with help from Eric and Tamara, to go through those samples to make sure that, your data forms are filled out correctly, that there's no leaking bottles, everything's labeled properly. I will thaw out all of your phosphorus bottles and add an acid preservative to make sure that they are shelf stable so they can sit on the lab shelf for a bit before it's their turn to be analyzed. And then when everything is ready to go, we then hand deliver them to Eagle's environmental laboratory that's based in Lansing. And Eagle's laboratory does all of the analysis of all of our total phosphorus and chlorophyll samples. And that's really great, knowing that everything's being analyzed by the same lab using the same procedures. We know that everything's being done consistently and your results will be very comparable from year to year and from lake to lake. So that's what happens. So right now, for everything that got turned in back in June, we are in the process of receiving the results. The Eagle Lab is working really hard on your samples and getting those data to us. So it's really exciting to see that happening every year, all those numbers coming in that represents all your hard work. And so, I mentioned one of my jobs is to make sure that all the samples are handled correctly and labeled correctly and that kind of thing. So I just wanted to point out a couple of things that we've gotten questions about or we've seen come through that might compromise your samples, and we don't want you to run into that situation. So the first thing is to be sure to pay attention to your summer sampling schedule. And we've got an image of those on here for both phosphorus and chlorophyll. And be sure to check those dates. In particular, take a look at your September date for chlorophyll. If you look at the example we're looking at here, that you see the arrow moving around, normally your sampling dates will be between the 10th and the 20th of each month. However, you notice the sample for September is a different set of dates. It's the 22nd through the 26th. So be sure to look for that because you may end up having a sample flagged or rejected if you stick to that between the 10th and the 20th situation there. So be sure to check your calendar and don't just get into the habit of doing it between the 10th and 20th every month. And you can find these schedules. We send them out to you, but they're also on MiCorps.net, as you know. And I think I saw a question come in about why we sample chlorophyll at twice Sucky depth. And that's a really good question. So chlorophyll, as you know, is a measurement of how much algae is in the water. Green algae, and they have chlorophyll in them for photosynthesis. And so if we can count how much chlorophyll is in the water, that gives us a good estimate of how much algae is in the water. So that shows us how productive your lake is. Now, the reason that we test the water down to twice the Sucky depth is because that is the maximum limit of sunlight penetration into the water column. Algae, of course, need that sunlight in which to grow. And even though we can see the Sucky disc, say, for example, 10 feet into the water, if you have a nice, kind of middle of the road lake, you can see it down about 10 feet. Our eyes are not as good as the chlorophyll in the algae. They can pick up light twice as deep as we can see a Sucky disc. So that's why we have you collect water all the way down to twice your Sucky depth.
And before we move on, Joe, there's another question. Shelby, go ahead.
Hey guys, so just a quick question. I got to speak to one of our CMU biological station students this last week. Her name's Miranda, and her study this summer has actually been taking Sucky disc, phosphorus, chlorophyll, and zooplankton samples from our inland lakes. Talking with her, she would love to share her data. So wondering if I should send that data along with ours in October, or if that's something I should send to Eagle.
Thanks, Shelby. That's a really good question. And we've had this question before from people that either have other researchers on their lake or maybe have a professional lake management company that collects data. For the purposes of MiCorps, we can only include our volunteer collected data. A couple of reasons for that. The number one reason for that is that the volunteers are trained to follow a specific procedure, and other scientists collecting data may be following a slightly different procedure or collecting at a slightly different time. And so our database is built to only include our volunteers' data. However, it's great that you have another source of data. And so absolutely, I'm sure she's sharing copies of it with you that you can use locally for, seeing how healthy your lakes are and any interesting changes, or even to compare her results to yours from the CLMP would be really interesting. We'd be happy to, look at those as well, just from a curiosity standpoint to help you interpret them. But there's no need to send them along with any MiCorps samples, because even though we might personally think it's interesting, we can't include it in the database the way it's structured. All right. Can I get that?
Hey, Joe, I'll just also add to that, Shelby, that if something concerning comes up in any of her samples, that I'll put it in the chat in just a second. But we do have at Eagle a targeted monitoring request system, and you can request monitoring. It's usually the fall time that we take those, from September through October usually. But if there's something concerning, you can always share that information through that process as well.
All right, thanks, Tamara. That's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, Eric, can you move on to the next slide? All right, this is just reminding you where you can find the summer sampling schedule. If you go to our MiCorps.net website, click on lakes, and then you'll see a section called CLMP documents. And you click there, this window will pop up, and we've helpfully put those sampling schedules right at the top of the page for you. Another important thing to remind folks of is that sample drop-off is between 8 a.m. and noon on your designated day shown on the schedule. Now, sometimes this happens, volunteers, life gets in the way, and you just can't get there between 8 and noon. The first recommendation we have for you is to reach out to that drop-off location. You'll notice for every drop-off location, there's a name and a phone number associated with it. Those are staff that are based at that location. And many of those locations have staff there during the week and have freezers where they can accept an early turn-in. So if you're not going to be able to make that drop-off time, reach out to your staff at the office there that's listed on their schedule, and they'll let you know if they're able to accept early samples. Not every location can, but some of them can. Otherwise, by all means, contact us, contact Eric or I, and we'll walk through various options with you till we find something that will work for you. One option that is becoming more and more popular, especially with gas prices and everything else, is to coordinate with other lakes in your area. You may have a lake right, a couple miles away that's also doing sampling, also has to drop off samples. And if you can coordinate with them, you might be able to take turns doing those deliveries. So that's a really nice option too. So if that's something you want to consider, we'd be happy to help put you in touch with other lakes in your area. Next slide. All right. Actually doing the sampling. We give you phosphorus bottles for a reason. They are clean inside. They are not contaminated. Please don't use any replacement container. We have gotten some phosphorus samples in some pretty strange containers, like shredded cheese containers, pop bottles. One time we got one in a urine sample jar, like from a hospital. Not sure what happened there. So, those have to go straight into the trash. We can't use them. It's also important to make sure you're not, leaning over the bottle. There's a comment here that like dandruff can change your phosphorus readings. You want to keep your sample clean. Put it only in the bottles that we give you. If you lose a bottle, if something happens to them, give us a shout. Jean has a little stash of extra supplies. And if you need, a replacement bottle or two, just let us know and we'll get those to you as soon as we can. Labeling is also really important. And we often, more than we'd like to admit, see bottles coming in where although clearly someone tried to label this bottle, by the time it got to us, it had gotten damp, which happens because these frozen bottles collect condensation in transit and so forth. The label has completely wiped off. It's not a completely ruined sample if the data sheet is enclosed with it, but sometimes people also forget to include their data form. And if there's no data form, I would have no idea where this bottle came from. And sometimes we can figure it out from process of elimination, but sometimes we can't. And we have to toss the sample. So make sure you're using pencil or a waterproof pen or marker. I love Sharpies. There's a lot of other options out there. You can also, one thing that people have told me they've struggled with before is they're out in the boat, their hands are wet, the bottles are wet, and then they try and label it and they can't write on it. You can always fill out your labels ahead of time. Before you go out that morning, fill out your labels and then they're ready to put on the bottle right there. So be sure that you're using waterproof pens or markers. I had probably 6 or 8 bottles come in this spring that look like this. And so it becomes a big, it's an effort to try and figure out where they came from. So be sure to be careful about that. And do the same thing when you're doing filling out your data forms also, is to fill them out with something that won't run or wash off if your data sheet gets wet. I saw a question pop up from Chris about side-by-side visits. Yes. We are still doing that. We actually have resumed doing that. We had to take a couple years off from doing side-by-side visits. But if you haven't heard of side-by-side visits, that is when staff, myself, Eric, or Tamara will contact a small percentage of lakes, usually around 10%. So it's only a few each year out of the whole program. And we'll come out and actually come on the lake with you and we'll collect a sample and you'll collect a sample and we'll see how the results add up. Now that's one of our quality control procedures to make sure that, the way we would collect the sample and the way you collect the sample result in the same value. And we have an extremely great track record. Our volunteers do such a good job in collecting their samples and handling their samples correctly, very, very good. There's always a really strong relationship between the results that we get and the results that you get. So, but we like to keep doing that just to make sure. And it also gives us a chance just to come out on the lake and get to know the volunteers, get to see your lake and hear about it and learn about it. We do them for all the different parameters from phosphorus collecting to plant monitoring. So if you haven't had one of those visits before, there's a chance you will get one in the future. Next slide, please. All right, the foil, right? Those of you who do chlorophyll sampling, that part of the procedure, kind of the last step, is to wrap your completed labeled filter tubes in foil. chlorophyll will degrade if it's exposed to light. So we need to make sure we keep those samples dark. That's why with the chlorophyll sample, the bottles we give you to put the water in are brown and not clear. We want to keep them in the dark at all times. So make sure you wrap your sample in foil. Next slide. But you don't need to wrap your phosphorus bottles in foil. It's okay if you do. We just have to unwrap them when we get them. So no need to wrap your phosphorus bottles. Next slide. Another fun tip, again, for chlorophyll folks, keep your preservative, that's magnesium carbonate or MgCO3, keep those bottles upright. We've had a few instances of folks saying that they went to get their bottle out of their sampling kit to do another sample this summer, and it was gone. It was empty. A few of them do tend, it looks like they're leaking a little bit if they're just kind of thrown in the bottom of your sampling bag. So keep it upright and you should be all set. If you happen to notice that it has dried out, another issue that could happen is the little tip on the top cap could be a little bit open. So make sure you snap that tip all the way down when you're putting your bottle back in storage. Keep it upright. But if you do run out, let us know. Again, we have a stash of extra and we can get more to you so you can finish your sampling season. All right, data forms. Remember how I mentioned if I can't read your label, how critical your data form is? So there's a few tips. First, be sure to include a copy of your data form with your samples. That's really critical because there's important information on there. Think about spring phosphorus. If you send in your spring phosphorus and don't have a data sheet, we have no way of knowing when ice out was because that's where you recorded ice out. So be sure to send a copy. Same thing is true for chlorophyll. Be sure that you fill out all the blanks, including your name and county, latitude, longitude, the names of the volunteers, everything. We need that filled out. And some folks will say, but wait, I fill this out every year. Why do I have to keep filling it out? Well, things change. Sometimes a volunteer will have someone help them out one month and maybe they didn't sample quite in the right location, or maybe here back at our headquarters are trying to figure out, the answer to a question. Did our volunteers sample in the right place or did they sample in the right dates? And if that data form isn't there, we have no way of knowing, and we probably have to try and call you, track you down, find out the answer. So make sure you include that. Also, another thing that I'll point out, this is the chlorophyll data form. And just a helpful hint, I know that we've come to realize that the design of the form might give the impression that we want you to cut it into strips and have one section for July, then cut along the line for August, then cut along the line for September. That was not our intention. We ask that you don't cut up your data form. Just keep it in a folder, a binder, clipboard, wherever you keep your sampling paperwork. Fill it out for every month as you go along. And then when you're done, just include one copy of that completely filled out data form with your set of chlorophyll samples. On the back of the data form, there's a spot for a map, and that is included in almost all of the parameters: phosphorus, chlorophyll, dissolved oxygen. That's another question we get. Do I have to draw a map every single time? I've been sampling the same place every year. Yes, we still need you to include that. We still need you to fill out that surface area of the lake field on there. Because again, every season we run into a handful of samples where there's some confusion about where the sample was collected, or on our end, we're just trying to confirm that our database and our mapping software is showing the right sampling location. And only you, as the volunteer who goes and does the sampling, knows where you're collecting your samples from. It's an exciting, updates that we're working for the MiCorps website is to have more maps where you can search by maps and look at data results by maps. And the only way we're going to be able to build a really useful map for all of us to use to look at how our lakes are faring across the state is to have that location information. So please be sure to include a map. You can draw it in the box. You can staple a copy of another map on there. People tape them on any way you want to get it to us. We don't want to make it difficult for you, but having that map is extremely helpful. So please make sure you fill everything out. All right, I'm going to hand it back over to Eric now.
Thank you, Joe. And so now finishing up, we're talking a little bit more about dissolved oxygen. And so here's some nice DO reminders just to keep in mind when before heading out and going out. So, we're conducting the sampling every other week through September. We want to turn on, there we go. We want to turn on our meters 15 minutes prior to calibrating. That's an important piece to get the equipment warmed up. To keep that equipment fully functional, we need that little sponge that's inside of the sleeve that the probe is in. Keep that wet. Doesn't need to be, that doesn't mean standing in water, but keep the sponge moist. We collect in our data in milligrams per liter, not percent saturation. So sometimes that something may have been clicked. So make sure you are in milligrams per liter. And then measure depths according to the data sheet. The last measurement though, because we don't want to be sitting on the lake bottom, is to be 1 foot or so above the lake bottom. And that is important for my next slide here. I wanted to show about sampling on the lake bottom. So this happens every once in a while. And part of it can be keeping, being aware if you're drifting. So if you're over the deepest part of the lake where you should be sampling and it's a windier day, you may have drifted off that location. And in that case, if you're in shallower water now, and that probe, you think you should be going deep enough, but it may not be. And there's a consequence to that. So for example, I made a make-believe curve and an oxygen curve. So this is what your data looks like if you're collecting data through the water column. So this is the top of the water is at 0, and then you get deeper and deeper. And then this is dissolved oxygen readings on the top. So you have lots of dissolved oxygen up in their upper parts of the lake. It changes quickly near that thermocline is what that's called. Many of us have experienced it if we jumped in the water. And then it becomes oftentimes consistent for this sampling period, for this particular sampling time in the lower parts of the lake where it's nice and cold. But then when it gets, so you have consistent measurements, and then the last measurement is completely 0. So that is a possibility that could be the case. However, it could also mean that your probe is in the sediment and there is no oxygen there, or there's malfunction of the equipment because it's now in the sediment. So just be aware of that and double check your depth at your sampling location to see if you've drifted off, because there are implications when your dissolved oxygen are at 0 for lake management and understanding your lake. And so having a correct reading near the bottom is important. So just keep that in mind. So this concludes our formal part of our presentation. If you need a refresher or just need some clarification on some of our protocols, of course, you can go to lakes. Oh, it's not 2021 training anymore. This is but 2022 lake training. And then you'd scroll down and you can see our training presentations for every single parameter. And so, and we have all those videos. We also have a PDF of the presentations in case you want to take notes with that. So thank you very much. Here's our contacts if you want to reach out to an individual, but then also not sure who to ask, check out email MiCorps@msu.edu. So thank you. And now we're opening it up for any questions.
Another thing I'll notice or I'll mention about those recordings of the training, those are really great if you have somebody who's going to help you out. Like say you're the lead volunteer, but you can't get out to do the August sample for chlorophyll, for example. It's one thing to, train, show another person from your lake how to do it. And that can totally work. But, those recorded trainings are there for you and they're there for them as well. So, take advantage of the fact that we've recorded all of those and ask your helpers to watch them as well. And then they'll have an idea of how to do things and also why we do things the way we do. There were a couple of examples of samples that I received. There were chlorophyll samples from this spring where it was clear that someone had helped out the lead volunteer for one of the months, and they made some kind of fatal mistakes. So we had to reject the samples. So, that's a great resource that we have. It was one of the benefits of moving everything to Zoom for a while here, is that we're able to record things like this. And this is also being recorded. So we're going to have this recording, and within a few days, we'll have it posted up on the MiCorps website too.
Yeah, I have a question. Hello?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah. It's a dissolved oxygen question, and maybe I'm overthinking this. It's my first year doing it. But since dissolved oxygen generally goes lower as you get deeper, and since it says in the instructions that if you leave the probe in a stationary spot too long, it will use up the oxygen right around the probe. And so the levels will start to read artificially lower than what it truly is. Is there any advantage to starting at the bottom or 5 feet off the bottom and working up instead of starting at the surface and working down?
I'm thinking about this. So first of all, I think you're with the using up, when you are taking a sample at a particular depth, making a jigging motion where the water passes through the membrane is enough that you will not, that you shouldn't be using up the oxygen in that sort of situation. So you should be getting a nice accurate reading if you're making that small jigging motion. And so I don't think there's a need to start from the bottom. Now, technically, you could start from the bottom, just like starting from the top, but it might make more sense. You don't want to lose track of that. And then I'll just mention, in some lakes, you might find that there's more oxygen on the bottom. And those are pretty neat. And those are in our low nutrient oligotrophic lakes. You actually might have more oxygen down there than up above.
All right. The jigging motion, should that be about 6 inches up and down?
I would say so. You don't want to be making big motions because you don't want to be moving out of your sampling location, depth, that is. So yeah, 6 inches or so, and kind of a gentle, I would do something like this.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Eric, I see there's a question in the chat from John that might be something you'd want to address. He asked, zooplankton measurements were mentioned earlier. I think that was Shelby's colleague. How are they done? And is this a future parameter that volunteers would undertake?
John, great question. We've talked about zooplankton because zooplankton are so fun. And they're an important biological, component of lake ecosystems. So just for everyone, a zooplankton is a animal wanderer. It's an invertebrate that are many times are transparent, and there's a lot of different species of them, in fact. And some are really small, some are relatively big, and you can see with your naked eye. And so they are really cool. You can sample them in various ways. The most common way is with a net that is like a cone called a Wisconsin Plankton Net. And that is put into the water. It's a mesh net. And so you pull it up and then you'll strain the water while grasping or catching the zooplankton. And then there's other methods as well, but that's the most common. And is this a future parameter that volunteers would undertake? We as a CLMP team do take in suggestions for new parameters. And then we as a team think about and discuss that. We discuss it with all of our different partners and then with Eagle to see if it warrants adding it to the CLMP. What's interesting about doing zooplankton samples is that what are we asking to do? Is it the biomass of all of the zooplankton? Is it IDing them to species? Is it, so there are many smaller questions that we would be asking to ourselves, asking what does a measure like that mean and why?
I'll mention that the process of adding new parameters is something that we are, I'll repeat, absolutely open to. And that's how Score the Shore started. We wanted to offer the opportunity to, listen to our volunteers and hear what they really wish they knew more about their lakes. And the number one by a wide margin was people wanting to know how to assess the health of their shorelines. And so that parameter was created in response to volunteer requests. Ralph, I see you've got your hands up. I'm going to call on Ralph first, Lisa, and then I'll get to you.
Okay.
Yeah, hello everyone. It's good seeing many of you I know, so nice seeing you all. I just want to expand a little bit about this twice the Sucky disc depth for the chlorophyll sample that Joe answered. And I put a little bit of that in the chat, but so light, penetrates into water. First of all, when it hits the surface, some of it's reflected, but the rest of it, sunlight will penetrate into water. And two things will happen. It'll scatter from various particles in the water, including algae, but also it can be absorbed. The energy of the various wavelengths can be absorbed by the chemistry of the water itself and the particles in the water. So, certain light will make it to different depths. And typically the wavelength that makes it the lowest is the blue wavelength. And that's why we see a lot of blue in deep, clear lakes. But the twice the Sucky depth is that we're trying to collect the algae that's in the photic zone of the lake, the maximum depth that light can penetrate. So when we take a Sucky disc reading, the light is penetrating down to the disc, but also it's reflecting back off that disc back to your eye. So you're seeing twice the distance that light is measuring, basically going down and then coming back. So that's the maximum depth of the light penetration that you see. And so what the algae will experience can be twice that depth. So that's why we collect the chlorophyll as a composite sample throughout the whole photic zone, which is twice the Sucky disc depth.
It's pretty neat when you can have algae that there's more chlorophyll, more algae can be lower in the water column than higher in the water column. You'd think there'd be more algae on the top because that's where the most light is, but you can actually get an algal plate more closer to the thermocline. And you can really detect this when you have the dissolved oxygen meter, where DO can actually be the highest at that place because of photosynthesis.
All right, Lisa, do you have a question for us?
Yeah, this goes back to Score the Shore. And this is the first year that we've done that activity on our lake. And I was wondering why we're not including information on what the bottom of the lake is. So for example, we have some sandy areas in our lake, natural sand. And so, when we're collecting information on how much submergent plant life there isn't any, even though there's no seawall there. I mean, it's completely natural. And so I'm wondering when you pull all of those data together to form the score, why the substrate of the lake bottom isn't a consideration.
Thanks, Lisa. That's a really good question. And, that happens a lot. I'm up here in Traverse City. We have a lot of sandy lakes, right? Where there's hardly any natural aquatic vegetation, especially near the shore. And so, you'll probably notice if you're going through Score the Shore that if you have a healthy submerged aquatic plant population, you gain some points for that. And you don't get those points if you have a just kind of open sand lake bottom, even if that's natural. And so, a couple of comments on that. First of all, that's a small part of the overall score, as I'm sure you see as you're going through that. It's a small part of the overall score. So if you're scoring well in the other categories, that not getting points for having aquatic plants isn't going to hurt your overall score, hardly at all. It'll be almost undetectable. Secondly, I think another thing to keep in mind is that if we tried to account for all the natural variability in some of the nearshore characteristics that our lakes have, the data form is still pretty lengthy and detailed for every section, and we have gotten a little bit of resistance about that. And so the more information that we ask for, the more onerous the procedure may become. So we did have to make some decisions. And we made those decisions based on making sure our protocol for the CLMP was comparable to the shoreline assessment protocol used by the DNR in Michigan. And so we followed that protocol as closely as we could, and then made it as volunteer friendly as we could. So the answers to the questions are a little more straightforward and so forth. So it's a really great point, but I think you'll see that if you have sections of your lake where the only place they are maybe losing a few points compared to a real plant dense area, it's really not going to impact the score very much, and your shoreline is still going to score well. All right, I saw a question from Chris back about DO. So maybe Eric or Tamara could address this. He asked, the 550 meter registers temperature really quickly, but the oxygen is slow to register. Sometimes it never seems to settle down. Is there a point where I just record the average reading?
I can answer that, Eric, if you want me to. I would say yes, there is a point where you just kind of have to, with your eye, decide what the average is. I have experienced it usually goes from, I'm just going to give an example. Let's say it's in the 6-point range. It'll go like 6.8, 7.2, 6.9, 7.1. So I would just put 7, like just because a difference in a few, like a half or less of a milligram per liter is not going to affect your overall reading. So yes, there's definitely a point where you'll just say that's good enough, but it'll be within a milligram. You're not, it's not going to jump. I wouldn't put an average if it's jumping from 7 to 5 to 8 to 4. That would be more concerning, but usually it'll settle down with at least a milligram.
Thanks, Tamara. That's been my experience as well with those meters. Leslie had a question. Can I change the site on our lake? The narrow hole we've been monitoring for several years is problematic due to drift if there's any wind at all. It sounds like it's hard to stay in that location. And there may be other deep holes that are more protected. We're open to talking to you about that. That's definitely a case-by-case basis kind of question, Leslie. So shoot us an email and we'll take a look at your situation. And, if it's becoming challenging and there's a better candidate spot with similar depth that we think will still be representative of the conditions in your lake, we may be able to do that. So good question. Ursula, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah. When it's really windy, the surface is really choppy and you don't really see the Sucky disc as well as if you would, if it was smooth. And I was wondering, I always put in windy conditions, I put windy. Do you consider that? Because, depth accuracy.
Yeah, that's a really great question, Ursula. Sometimes, especially on larger lakes or lakes that get a lot of, have a long fetch and get really choppy, it can be hard to find a calm time to go out and collect your samples, especially if you're trying to go out midday.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. So that's why we have
at times not gone out because of that, because
safety, right? I mean, that's another thing to think about for sure. So yes, that's why on the data sheet, as you said, you write down in the comments that it was windy when you took the measurement. So absolutely, that's included in the database. Mm-hmm. So anytime anyone is looking at those data or doing any interpretation, that's why we capture that information. We know you're doing the best you can. Sometimes you have to make that judgment call. And on some lakes, I know we suggest that you should do your measurements between 10 and 2 during the day. But sometimes, it just makes more sense to go out a little bit earlier or later when it's going to be calmer for you, both from a safety standpoint and from an accuracy standpoint. So that's okay too, if you feel the need to do that sometimes.
Okay.
Great question.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure. All right. John had a question in the chat. Is MiCorps considering having our lake and stream data included in EPA's How's My Waterways site? And I know our data we connect our data through Eagle. Tamara, I don't know if you have any comments on that, on how MiCorps data could be or may be shared with some of the federal databases?
Yeah, so the How's My Waterway is connected to what used to be called WQX, which is the federal database for water quality information. We do have what's called those ID numbers that you guys each use for your lakes are also called storette numbers, which is recognized by the WQX database. So it is possible, at least for our lake data, like our stream volunteers don't use those storette numbers. But yeah, it is something we could consider. We need to do some updates to the database, which we've been working on for the last couple of years, and we'll continue to work on in the next 3 or 4 years. So that definitely is something we could think about.
The reason I ask is there's other associated data that is already documented for a lot of the lakes that are doing volunteer monitoring.
Mm-hmm.
Same with flow rates and so forth at bridges and what have you, where macro invertebrate sampling is occurring. And then also a lot of consultants who are doing under contract to lake management boards could easily be asked to upload to that. And there are occasional other sampling that has been done that's shown even on smaller lakes that's not really coming out of state agencies that is there. It would give one place if you really wanted to see everything that was going on to do it. And it seems to be very user-friendly. So
I'm glad
okay.
you think so, John, because I haven't gotten that comment from too many people yet about it being
well,
user-friendly.
it's
So
yeah,
I'm glad
well,
you think so.
What it allows you to do is find a lake by a map,
yes,
and you can see all the stuff, and you can key in on it. And if that's where you're going with the current database in CLMP, it seems to be redundant to do something that's already well established and seems to be working. So I don't know. It was just an idea. So
you're right. It's very
like it's going to happen
visually
anytime
based.
soon.
Yeah, it's very visually based, and I like that about it as well. So thanks for the suggestion, and I definitely will bring that up when we're talking about that possibility, because we're also having the same discussions about the data that Eagle collects for lakes, because that's not always been available, widely distributed for all of our projects. Some of our projects are on there, but not all of them. So we're definitely including the CLMP data when we're talking about it.
Okay. While I'm front and center, spring phosphorus. Give me a quick refresher as to what that particular result tells us. I know it's not included in the composite scoring of the eutrophic state of the lake. And then this year, I noticed basically overnight the turnover in our lake. So we went from, though it wasn't measured, a clarity that would have given us a Sucky reading of close to 10 feet or more to the next morning not being able to see 6 inches down into the lake. So it was a real dramatic turnover. It was within the 2-week window, but my wondering is if we had taken the sample on the morning of the turnover, how would our results compared with, let's say we'd taken them earlier in the 2-week window after ice out? And what does it really tell us anyway?
So our phosphorus samples are collecting what's called total phosphorus. And this is what that refers to is that it's coarsely referring to is that it's collecting dissolved and particulate phosphorus. And if you collected, and there could be some other things happening, so I'm just speaking broadly here. If you collected when the water clarity was high, your lake was still probably or was in turnover, because spring, once the ice comes off, your lake is usually consistent temperature throughout the top to the bottom, and dissolved oxygen, everything is mixing. And so what's happening there is, well, there could be a lot of things, but it could be having to do something with zooplankton that John brought up, where you have really clear conditions and then you don't, and you could get certain blooms during that time of certain algae, specifically diatoms is probably what was going on there, where they can reproduce really quickly and change the water clarity in those conditions. So spring phosphorus is collecting, because the lake is mixing during this time, we are getting a good estimate of how much phosphorus is in the lake, because we're mixing from top to bottom. Where when we collect in the summer, we are collecting in a stratified system in deep lakes. And so the bottom of the lake will likely have different phosphorus readings from the top of the lake. Whereas in the spring, we are consistent from top to bottom.
Well, one of the things that occurred this spring, we got nearly complete ice out, and then we had a few really cold days. So then ice went back and started to form again on the lake, and then finally, after it was all off, about a week later, is when all of a sudden we saw the overnight change in clarity. And I just wondered my understanding of it was that as the top water temperature finally warms up to about 39 degrees, it drops, and that is the big component that causes the turnover. I was suspecting that may have happened, and I just was wondering if anybody had done any temperature related turnover evaluations and what impact that had on the exact time you take the sample.
Well, in that case, and I have to think about this for a moment, but I'll just kind of start talking about it, is, it doesn't require, the water doesn't require to be at 4 degrees Celsius, 39 degrees, to be dense and mixing. It's more of what's called, that will be isothermal. It just needs to be the same temperature throughout, or really similar. And it doesn't have to be at the densest water can be at to be in the mixing, to be mixing. And so it shouldn't, once that ice is off, so what's probably happening with the, that little ice that came back on is that biological things were changing in the lake, the light conditions, for example, and looking at algae, they weren't having a good time until that ice was totally off, and maybe the water was warming up a little bit more. But I'd have to think about your scenario. There's a lot going on there. But again, for phosphorus readings, it shouldn't make a difference, because total phosphorus is still picking up dissolved phosphorus, and mixing happens for the most part right after ice off. It does happen right after ice off.
I know I'm watching the time. We're at 11, and Terry has had his hand up for a little while. So I want to give Terry a chance to ask his question.
Thanks, Joe. I'm going to be doing Score the Shore real soon on our lake. And I also am a drone pilot. And I was wondering if there were any reasons why or issues of using my drone to help with the process and recording video.
That's a really great question, Terry. Hold on, I need to mute somebody here. There we go. So Terry, that's cool. So I'll give the disclaimer: as long as you're operating your drone in accordance to local, rules and regulations, Yeah, you could absolutely use your drone to collect imagery of your shoreline. In fact, I have spoken with other drone pilots about doing the same thing, and some people have played around with it and found it a really nice way to capture images of their shoreline in a way that would be really excellent for comparison in the future. I can imagine doing a shoreline imagery capture, this year, and then going back in a few years, doing it again and kind of comparing those side by side. So you're absolutely, go for it. If you want to do that to, view and collect imagery about your shoreline, you can, because that's also nice, because then you can go back and, like, from the comfort of your desk, look at that imagery and fill out the forms as best you can. Now, there's some details that you need maybe to be on the water as well. I wouldn't just rely on drone imagery to answer all the questions, but as far as documenting conditions and being able to compare them over time, I think it's a really great tool. When you share and input your Score the Shore information into our database, you can upload photos. They are limited. I think you can do 5, and they can't be more than like 5 megabytes or something like that. So I don't know if our database would handle some of the level of imagery you'd be collecting, but you could include selected images that you wanted to. But then for your own reference, I think it'd be really cool. And I'd love to see how it works out for you, because we've had questions about this from other folks about if there's any like best practices or whatever for using drones to help them do Score the Shore. So did they answer your question?
It did. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right, so we're a little bit after 11, but I don't want to cut things off if people have remaining questions that they want to put in the chat or just speak up and ask. But I do want to say thank you for coming. And, I think Eric would agree that if folks need to hop off, they certainly can.
Sure. Thank you, everyone.
No problem. I see Greg made a comment related to what I was just talking about, just to me, but he did mention be careful about using drones during duck hunting season and so forth. It may be disruptive for waterfowl hunters and so forth. So again, just a reminder for those who engage in different activities around the lake that just use drones with care and consideration. Ralph, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I just want to add to the answer for the spring total phosphorus. That parameter was one of the first expanded parameters in the Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program. After we did the Sucky disc for so many years, but that was added because, like Eric said, it's a representative sample of the whole lake, assuming that the lake has mixed right after ice out. So it's really important. It's a uniform sample year after year, and that's the key. You want long-term data and you want uniform data so you can determine changes and trends. So that's probably the most important aspect of spring total phosphorus. Also, spring total phosphorus really is the basis of the start of the phosphorus as far as growth of the plants and algae. So that's kind of the start. So you have a starting point, and then you go into your summer data, and then you look at your indicators for that. But I want to talk about mixing. So mixing, 4 degrees centigrade is important because that's the most dense of water. But the other factor of mixing that's extremely important is energy, is wind. Just the density difference is not going to mix your lake top to bottom, typically. So the wind is really important. So that varies obviously year to year. And if you have a small kettle lake that's protected by, the small hillsides, shoreline, you may not get complete mixing every year. And you can see that in the long-term database for many of the small lakes. And there's a lot of variability in that spring phosphorus because of that. But that averages out over time. And for larger lakes, you typically will get complete mixing, assuming you have enough wind to drive that water and mix the lake totally. The other thing I want to say about databases is there are a lot of databases out there. One database that this group may be interested in is the North America Lakes Management Society database for the Sucky dip-in. That occurs during this month. This is Lakes Appreciation Month. And if you go to the North America Lakes Management Society website, you can get all information, and you can actually take your Sucky disc readings and put it into that database. And that's a global database. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Ralph. We always appreciate your history and context for the program. I think most of you know Ralph, but if you don't, he was a longtime Eagle coordinator for the CLMP. All right. Last chance, questions, comments. You can unmute, type into the chat. We're here as long as you need us.
I have to have a chance to show Zooplankton because they're so neat.
Or terrifying, depending.
Yes, right. Just to inspire more questions.
The fact that you showed that it's only 200 microns is helpful, because if this was, life size, I'd be a
right. It eats fish.
Unsuspecting swimmers. All right, well, I feel like we've kind of come to a natural pause here. So again, feel free to contact us at any time during the season. That's what we're here for, is to support your work. Tamara gave her sign off in the chat. You see Jean and Eric and I are here to answer questions, to help you with anything that comes up during the course of the season, or question, if you're like John and you're thinking about how your lake turned over one day and you're not sure how that affects your readings, we can help with those questions as well. So yeah, thanks you all for being here, for sure.
Yes, thank you.